We got some news this afternoon that, to be honest, was not on my bingo card for the day and was really not on my bingo card ever. Former LSU head baseball coach Paul Mainieri is expected to accept the job at South Carolina. Will Paul Mainieri be successful in this next venture?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube as well. So if you like listening to the podcast, awesome. Thank you for always tuning in on your preferred podcast platform. But do not forget that you can always watch us in addition to listening to the podcast on YouTube. Just search Locked On LSU in that YouTube search bar and subscribe. Comment, like it, rate and review the podcast. Just appreciate you for always being here and for always interacting with us here at Locked On LSU. And today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. So that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. So if I got the show all prepped today, I was going to do a full, post-season roster check for LSU baseball, who's returning, who might return, who could declare for the draft, who's transferred, and we'll still get into that. We'll get into a little bit of it today at the end of the podcast, but get into really the kind of the meat and potatoes of it throughout the week. But then breaking news happened, and then everything was kind of thrown out the door whenever it was reported initially by Baseball America and then confirmed by Kendall Rogers of D1Baseball.com. Of course, Kendall and everybody over at D1 Baseball and also Baseball America, they're incredibly plugged in. They're incredibly reliable sources. And it was, initially confirmed by some friends and people I know over at South Carolina that Paul Mainieri, former head coach at LSU baseball, won a national championship with LSU, got LSU back to the College World Series final in 2017 for ultimately losing to Florida in that 2017 College World Series. Paul Mainieri, who retired after the 2021 season, who I fully thought was done with the game, had decided to hang it up, spend time with his family, take care of his himself, his body, his psyche, all of the above, enjoy his retirement, enjoy the fruits of his labor. He's making a return to college baseball, and he's not just making any old regular return. He's returning to the SEC and is expected to take over the vacancy at South Carolina. So, wow, is my first initial impression whenever I first saw the news. This coming up from Baseball America was the first one to have it. It was Teddy Cahill of Baseball America. I had to double and triple check that this was a reliable source. Like, this is his real account. This isn't just like some fake person that bought a blue check mark. Like, this is a reliable source. And to be honest, my initial reaction was, well, that would make sense that South Carolina would pursue Paul Mainieri. It would make sense that that South Carolina would at least pick up the phone, because we know that Notre Dame was in communication with Paul Mainieri and their coaching search in 2022. We know that Miami consulted with Paul Mainieri for their coaching search. I believe it was last year. So we knew that Paul Mainieri had at least been in communication with programs and with athletic departments with an opening, but he hadn't taken any of them. So I thought, okay, this would make sense that South Carolina is at least picking up the phone and calling him. It would make zero sense to me if Paul Mainieri takes this job. But sure enough, it sounds like if all of this reporting is correct and if all goes well according to South Carolina and Paul Mainieri's people, that Paul Mainieri will in fact be taking over that job. This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to be so honest. And look, let me say, I'm so happy that Paul's going to be back into our sport. I'm so happy that Paul Mainieri is going to be back into this league. I have nothing but fantastic and wonderful things to say about Paul Mainieri. When I was at LSU and covering the team as a student, when I was growing and learning and kind of awkward and didn't really know what I was doing, Paul Mainieri was so gracious with his time. He was so kind and so understanding. And I do think that any other media member who has come through Baton Rouge and has come through the halls of LSU baseball, whether it's in an intern capacity or a student capacity or a professional capacity, I think that every single person would agree with me that Paul was so gracious with his time and such an absolute pleasure to cover. So I'm happy for him if this was a move that he wanted to make to come back into college baseball. And I'm happy that he gets to do that. I'm happy that he gets an opportunity, and I'm so excited to have him back in the league. But this doesn't make sense to me on either fronts. It doesn't make sense to me. Well, let's start with the Paul Mainieri perspective. It doesn't make sense that a man that is 66 years old, who has retired and said that he wanted to retire to spend more time with his family and take care of himself and take care of his health, would want to now come back into college baseball when the game, the league, the sport, college sports as a whole look very different than they did the last time Paul was coaching in college baseball. Let's not forget, NIL became legalized in July of 2021. Paul Mainieri coached his final college baseball game in June of 2021. Paul Mainieri has never lived in an NIL era. The life of a college coach, baseball, football, basketball, softball, gymnastics, track and field, swimming, all of it, all of the above, every single sport, any coach in any sport, their jobs have never been more difficult than they are now. And that's saying a lot because the life of a college coach has always been hard. It has always been a 24/7 operation. They have always been on the road, recruiting, going, sitting with the families and having conversations in their living room, scouting players, going to, all ends of the country, going to Northern California and Southern Florida to scout players in high school. It's always been hard. It's always been time consuming. And it's just gotten that much harder since Paul Mainieri has left the sport. I don't see why returning to this level, the SEC level, the most competitive conference in all of college baseball, and it's been that way for a long time, and nobody knows that better than Paul Mainieri does, that he would want to come back and coach at this level. Like, it's not just, tipping your toes into the deep end of college baseball. Like, you're diving head first. I don't get why Paul would want to do that. Let's look at the South Carolina perspective. South Carolina moved on from their head coach at the end of the season because it wasn't good enough, and it hadn't been good enough for a long time. Mark Kingston is South Carolina's former head coach's name. That they fell short of expectations. They didn't get to Omaha. And look, this is a South Carolina program that knows what it's like to be at the top of college baseball. Won a national championship not too long ago. South Carolina fans, they love baseball now. In this new era of college sports, of NIL, of the transfer portal running more rampant than it ever has, it shocks me that South Carolina brings in a coach that's never done it in this era. Paul Mainieri's won a national championship. Paul Mainieri is one of the best recruiters in the country. Paul Mainieri has won at an incredibly high level. Paul Mainieri has won national championships at multiple stops. That is a resume that not a lot of coaches in this league, in this sport, can say that they've done. Paul Mainieri is a Hall of Fame baseball coach. This is nothing against Paul Mainieri, but this is a different beast. So to me, I find it a little bit of an odd hire from South Carolina's perspective, where there are a lot of new, programs with vacancies that are going for the young coaches, the cutting edge coaches, the coaches that, don't have a whole lot of, or have a ton of tread on the tire left, that are embracing this new era. They know nothing different than this new era. So bringing in a coach that hasn't done it in the NIL space. Again, zero disrespect whatsoever to Paul Mainieri. Don't get that twisted. So I'm confused about this all the way around, to be completely honest with you. But coming up next, I want to get into, will Paul Mainieri be successful at South Carolina? What does success look like for Paul Mainieri at South Carolina? We'll get into that coming up next after just a couple of words from our sponsors. All right, before we get into more Locked On LSU, I want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. So, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So, the radio station that I work for, we used LinkedIn Jobs when we were looking for a new producer. And to be honest with you, like, we're a radio station that we don't have a ton of money. We don't have a ton of people with a lot of time that can dedicate, to finding a new producer and to interviewing all these candidates and looking through all of the resumes. So that's why we went to LinkedIn Jobs, because it is so easy to find the perfect qualified candidate for the role with LinkedIn Jobs, because it's not just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but could be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, then you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, so you can be one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. Rolling along here on Locked On LSU. Again, the news of Monday afternoon. Paul Mainieri is expected to take the head coaching job at South Carolina. Whoa. Wow. I mean, just like, I'm still trying to process it. Honestly, I don't think it's going to hit me until I see Paul Mainieri in a South Carolina uniform. I mean, I'm going to be like, don't like how that looks. It's like how, it was like watching Tom Brady in a Bucks uniform. It was like watching Peyton Manning in a Broncos uniform. It's like, ooh, that doesn't look right. That looks odd. So whenever we hear Sweet Paul's voice at a South Carolina podium, it's probably not really going to hit me. What I want to know is Paul Mainieri going to be successful at South Carolina? And maybe the more important question is, what is success at South Carolina? I don't think that South Carolina is bringing Paul Mainieri in just to get to a regional every once in a while. I don't think that South Carolina is hiring Paul Mainieri with the resume that he has, the caliber of a coach that he is, just to win a few games here and there, and then maybe possibly host a super regional every once in a while. I think South Carolina is bringing Paul Mainieri in to win a national championship. I think that whoever South Carolina hired, it was with the intention to win a national championship. South Carolina understands, just like we all understand, how competitive this league is, how high the expectations are for nearly every single team in this league. I mean, look at the teams that are now going to be represented in Omaha. Kentucky, possibly Georgia. The NC State, at time of recording, the NC State Georgia game isn't wrapped up quite yet. Tennessee, which Tennessee has been to Omaha 3 the last 4 years. It's not like they're completely new to this, but like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody gave a crap about Tennessee baseball. So there could be 5 SEC teams represented in Omaha, and not LSU, not Vanderbilt, not Ole Miss, not Mississippi State, not these traditional baseball powers that we've all grown accustomed to. It's kind of the newbies, because all of these teams, all of these programs have realized that this league is not getting any less competitive anytime soon. So let's go ahead and be competitive in it. South Carolina wants to be right back into the mix. South Carolina doesn't want to be an afterthought when talking about SEC baseball. South Carolina wants to be in the mix with Vanderbilt and LSU and Ole Miss and Florida and now Tennessee. Your Omaha frequent flyers, so to speak. That's what South Carolina is expecting to get from Paul Mainieri. I have to think that. I don't think that Paul Mainieri is coming out of retirement to just coach for fun. I don't think that Paul Mainieri is coming out of retirement and coming out of the career that he had at LSU just to be unsuccessful and miss the postseason at South Carolina. I think that both Paul Mainieri and South Carolina are in lockstep and say, look, this is a move that everyone involved is making because we want to win a national championship. Cool, we got that. We all agree in agreement. Cool. All right, let's shake hands. Let's sign a contract. So can Paul Mainieri achieve that? I think the way to answer that question is by following it up with two other questions. Is Paul Mainieri ready and willing to embrace and compete in this new era of college sports? One, NIL, essentially NIL. Is Paul Mainieri ready to embrace and utilize and compete in NIL? And two, is South Carolina willing to give Paul Mainieri the resources to be competitive in an NIL space? Because although NIL is new, Paul Mainieri, let's be honest, not new to giving incentives to players. Let's be completely and totally honest, okay? Every time I bring that up on the podcast, there's always somebody that comments and says, hey, LSU ain't followed the rules, okay? LSU didn't pay players before it was like, yes, they did. Yes, they did. So many teams in America did it, okay? Like, it's not just LSU. Kentucky basketball did it. Duke basketball did it. Alabama football did it. LSU football did it, okay? Everybody's guilty. Let's not act like everybody's playing by the book at all times. To what extent? I don't know. It was all behind closed doors, but let's not be naive. But now everyone can do it. Now everyone can be out in the open about it. Now, whenever you're having one-on-one conversations with recruits, that is going to be part of the conversation. Where before it was a little taboo and you had to be under the table about it and it was all hush-hush and secret. Now it's like, how much are you going to pay me? How much are you willing to offer me? How many NIL deals? How lucrative is this program? Now, I don't think that Paul Mainieri would get back into college baseball if he wasn't wholeheartedly, jumping into it arms wide open, willing to embrace NIL as a whole, willing to be incredibly competitive in NIL. I have to know that he knows what he's getting into, right? Like, it's not like, I don't think Paul Mainieri is making this decision in an uneducated way. Like Paul's a smart guy. Paul knows a lot of people in this sport. Paul's as plugged in as anybody. I have to know he's making this decision, knowing what he's getting himself into. But when I think of the most robust collectives and the teams and the programs that have been most involved in NIL, I think about Texas. I think about Texas A&M. I think about LSU. I think about Alabama. I think about Kentucky basketball. South Carolina doesn't come to mind in any sport. Even women's basketball, where South Carolina is a freaking powerhouse and a dynasty. Dawn Staley sells that program, I think, more than any other NIL deal could. And that's not to say that there's, women on that basketball team or athletes at South Carolina that aren't cashing in on NIL. I just don't really think of South Carolina as being the most lucrative collective, the most robust in the NIL space. So can South Carolina give Paul Mainieri what he needs to succeed? Paul Mainieri is, and I still believe he is, one of the best recruiters in the country. We saw it firsthand at LSU, the amount of talent he was able to bring within that door. But it's different. It's different now. And how much different is it at South Carolina? What are recruiting pitches that worked in 2016 that aren't as effective in 2024? And frankly, I don't know exactly what those conversations look like. Paul Mainieri could fit into this new era seamlessly. Is Paul Mainieri going to be successful at South Carolina? I don't know. For his sake, I truly hope so, because I think that Paul Mainieri is a great coach and a fantastic person. But I don't know. This whole thing is just wild. Like, excuse me for a lack of analysis there in that statement, but like, whoa. Like, did anybody see this coming? Anybody? I had a couple of names kind of running through my head of who was gonna eventually take over that South Carolina job. And let me be honest, like Paul Mainieri was not on that list. I thought maybe Dan McDonnell from Louisville. I don't know. It's wild. All right, let's get into some updates, some roster updates. LSU offseason. We'll get into that coming up next year on Locked On LSU. All right, before we get into more Locked On LSU, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet all of it on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $200 that you can use to bet everything from Finals MVP to who is going to hit one out of the park. Now, there are so many things that you can bet on, that you can get in on the action with on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Look, I don't know if you've watched any of the NBA Finals. Give me the Celtics. Give me the Celtics to win it all. Like, give me the Celtics everything. Give me the Celtics to win Game 3. Give me the Celtics to win it all. And right now on the FanDuel Sportsbook app, the Celtics are minus 950 to win the series. So not great value there, but you can check out several other prop bets that they have on FanDuel Sportsbook app. For example, Luka Doncic to score 30-plus points in every game of the series at plus 160. Now, I'm going to take the Celtics to win this series, but Luka is inevitable, especially in the postseason. Unfortunately, Luka's just not getting very much help from the rest of the roster. So, hey, that's one thing that you can place your money on. Some of my thoughts, some of my takes, but do it however you want to do it. Just do it with the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Again, you can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, rolling along here at Locked On LSU. Thank you all again for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Again, the news of the day, Paul Mainieri heading to South Carolina. Absolutely wild. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. You can tweet me. You can comment it down below. And of course, we'll be getting to a mailbag Wednesday on Wednesday. So if you have Paul Mainieri related questions, baseball related questions, LSU baseball related questions, Omaha related questions, this has been, such a fun posting so far. So we'll absolutely get into all of it throughout the podcast. So feel free to send those questions in. Just wanted to kind of do a little bit of a refresher on where LSU baseball finds itself right now in the offseason as players transfer in, players transfer out. I want to focus on the pitching, because when I see players enter the transfer portal and the list of players that are leaving either out of eligibility or inevitably will enter the MLB draft, I'm looking around and I'm thinking, like, who the hell is going to be on the mound for LSU this upcoming season? Like, I'm a little bit worried about the pitching depth here, and at least about the proven pitching depth. So just the list of players that have already announced that they're going to enter the transfer portal or have entered the transfer portal. And this is just looking at pitchers. We'll do a full transfer portal recap later this week. Nick Bronzini, the redshirt freshman left-handed pitcher, he's entered the transfer portal. He only pitched 4 innings this past season, but that's one guy that's pitching depth and young pitching depth that we're not going to have anymore. Cam Johnson, the freshman left-handed pitcher, we saw a little bit from him, especially toward the beginning of SEC play, pitched 9 innings. A really encouraging and talented young player, was the 11th ranked player in the 2023 recruiting class. He's entered the transfer portal. Aiden Moffitt, a sophomore righty who saw more action than some of those other freshmen. 17 innings pitched. We saw him come out against Tennessee, and then later in conference play as well. 17 innings pitched, a 5.6 ERA. A guy that definitely didn't have his best stuff this past year, but a guy that I was excited about to continue to build on, that, hey, maybe next year, 2 years down the line, could he find himself in a starting rotation? I mean, like, why not? He's entered the transfer portal. Micah Bucknam. I always want to call him Mekhi Becton. Doofus. Sophomore righty, 9 innings pitched, a 7 ERA this past season. Again, none of these guys, like, these are some names that you, if you are, not super diehard hardo into the depths of LSU baseball's roster. And if you're not, I don't blame you. The average fan isn't. Most fans aren't. You might not even recognize some of those names. So it's not like you're losing guys that I think Jay Johnson was relying on to be a starter this upcoming season, because frankly, I do believe if they had a starting role carved up for themselves this upcoming season, they wouldn't be transferring. Maybe there wasn't a place for them on this roster. But just take a look at the list of players that are either expected to enter the MLB draft or out of eligibility. Luke Coleman, Gage Jump, Thatcher Hurd, Nate Ackenhausen, Christian Little. Eesh. Guys that could leave for the draft. Griffin Herring, Gavin Guidry, Javen Coleman, Sam Dutton. Like, those are your starters. Those are your relievers. Those are a lot of your closers. And those are a lot of just your depth pieces in the bullpen. Anybody else? Just a wee bit nervous at that position. That's how many names that I just listed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 pitchers that are either transferring, leaving for the draft, are out of eligibility, or could leave for the draft. Now, Griffin Herring, Gavin Guidry, I really wouldn't be surprised to see those guys come back next year. But look, they've got a decision to make. Now, on the other side of that, the good news is, if we're going to talk about adding pitching depth, that LSU did land a transfer portal player, Chandler Dorsey from South Florida, a righty. He announced Monday morning that he'll be heading to LSU. It was a closer, primarily was his role, but it was USF's go-to closer, like kind of their Griffin Herring this past season. 26 innings, had a 3.42 ERA. Not bad at all. Through 32 strikeouts, only gave up 18 hits and 11 runs in those 26 innings pitched. Held opponents to a 180 batting average this past season. Really impressive. And what I thought was the most impressive, in his 6 final outings this past season at USF, all 6 of his final outings, not just 6 total, he had 18 total, but 6 of his final outings, all 6 of his final outings were all shutouts. 18 shutout appearances, but his final 6 were shutout appearances. That shows me a few things. He showed up when it mattered toward the end of the season, and that he was pitching his best baseball, pitching his best pitches at the end of the season, and that shows development, that shows growth throughout the season. So Chandler Dorsey, the righty out of USF, has announced his intention to transfer to LSU. So you're at least adding a little bit there. You're bringing Chase Shores back and healthy next year. Reminder, Chase Shores was like the bee's knees, like one of the top pitchers in the 2022 recruiting class, came in the 2023. Is that right? 2022? Is that right? The 2023 season, he left early in like April. He had a couple of appearances being, the hot shot. That is right. 2022. Okay. Sorry. Working through that in my head. 2022 recruiting class, one of the top pitchers out of the state of Texas, came in 2023, was out on the mound just a little bit, and then had Tommy John, was out the entire 2023 season, was out the entirety of this season. And Tommy John, usually about a 1.5 to 2 year recovery. Should expect him to be back out there. Cade Anderson will be back, a lefty. Jaden Newt, a righty, will be back. So that's 3 guys that are returning, 1 guy you're getting in the transfer portal, and a handful of guys that have a decision to make. But overall, not a ton of proven commodities on the mound. What kind of work is Jay Johnson going to be doing in the transfer portal? That's what I'm going to be looking at as we progress throughout the offseason. And of course, as some guys continue to enter the transfer portal as we make our way throughout the postseason and ultimately to Omaha later this week. So something to keep an eye on there. pitchers, arms. Who is going to replenish a bullpen that looks like it's largely going to be depleted? But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts.